Dear God, thank you for giving us your word. Help us to open our hearts and minds to learn from you. Guide us in our studies and give us wisdom and understanding. Amen.
Amen. All right, questions from chapter 3. Swid, and then Brian.
I noticed literary use here of repetition on the first during the first let's see 13 verses. Everyone who doesn't bow at the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, etc. A good literary technique in storytelling, for one thing. And the other thing, John, did you plan your sermon yesterday to coincide with this lesson?
Nope.
But talk about the risk versus reward.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Brian.
Yeah, as I read it, I didn't realize that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up that statue until I read it for the 8th time. I mean, that was mentioned. I went back to count them 8 times that they remind us that he had set up that statue. My question is, again, the same literary thing that was just brought up.
Yeah.
It was like a new statue, just like the golden calf is a new statue. I got to believe that I don't see him worshiping this God. Really, is this? I mean, obviously he's got an ego. Put him in the position of God, I would assume. Not like the Egyptians that would have gods, pharaohs, gods that were already set up before the pharaohs that they would worship. I didn't see any intention of him here worshiping this God, or am I just making an assumption that's wrong? Or why is it mentioned so many times that we get this message that he was the one?
Okay. In other words, what did the statue stand for?
Yeah, in a way, because I didn't really see him ever worshiping it. It's just like it was almost like he was presenting himself as God, that he did this.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of kings have done that, but I guess I was like trying to see the whole significance of that
Sure.
whole thing through the,
Okay. Yeah.
the-
Yeah. Through the eyes of the writers and compilers.
Right. Mhm.
Mary.
Well, he's the king is so upset that the Hebrews aren't worshiping the statue, but in the previous story, he's saying that the Hebrew God is the greatest of all and all this stuff. So I'm thinking he changed his mind or something.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because he was
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We can certainly
Okay.
talk about that. Now, the other Mary.
Unless I got the names wrong, Daniel's not in this story. Is that correct?
Correct. Which is an interesting piece of this. So I'll put that down. Daniel missing. Marcy, and then we'll go to Mike.
I was wondering, it didn't say who the 4th one was, but I always got implied in my head or something that it was Jesus down there with them. But that's the question. Do we have any idea that it could have been Jesus, or what's the story there?
Very good question. You would not be alone in saying it's Jesus, but there are other options. But you would not be alone in that, Marcy. Mike.
I was somewhat interested in the type of furnace that's described in this chapter. I'm having trouble picturing what it would look like. How are they able to fire it? Also, how are they able to increase the intensity by a factor of 7? What were the mechanics behind how this furnace operated?
All right, a good engineering
You know anything
question.
about that?
Right. Yes, I have that down 7 times.
Get that man on property care.
Oh, let's see. I think I saw, yeah, there, David.
Back on Brian's comment, what I find interesting as I read it is they bring everyone together for the dedication, but they never explain what they're really dedicating the statue to.
Right. Right. And yeah, this is the whole question of the statue is significant. So we'll have to spend some time looking at that. Okay. What else before we jump in? All right. Okay. Yeah, so let's just start with the missing Daniel. Anyone want to take just a stab at why Daniel might be missing from this story? Mary.
Well, it says that the Babylonian court was jealous of the 4 Jewish guys that came in and kind of had high positions. My guess is that Daniel's so high up that they can't really threaten him. Though I think later on in Daniel, they do try. But anyway, so I'm thinking, and what I find interesting is Daniel's, okay, they have Hebrew names,
right?
And they're given Babylonian names. Daniel's always referred to with his Hebrew name, whereas the other 3, Hananiah, Hezekiah, or whatever, are always referred to as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're Babylonian names. So anyway, but I think it's because Daniel's too high up. They can't get him at this point. They want to get rid of the other 3.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good speculation. Anyone else? Barbara.
I was thinking that these stories happened before Daniel even was around, that they were old stories that he was telling to make a point that will then come to fruition later in Daniel, or it be woven in later.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Anyone else? Let's go to Mary Goltz and then Paul.
Well, long ago and far away, I read Daniel. And I'm sticking to going in order and being patient. But as I sort of remember, Daniel builds up. You know, this is just like the first little story, and the next little story becomes more critical and involves more people. And the third one, you know, it gets more entangled. And I think Daniel's just saved. It's a literary contrivance.
Okay. All right. Paul.
I think Daniel was just too busy. He was giving a lot of responsibilities in other parts of Babylonia, and he might have been in Australia.
That's very likely.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Holly.
Well, I thought one thing was in the beginning when we were discussing the introduction to Daniel, you said Daniel, there were a bunch of Daniels, and maybe there wasn't one at this exact time, or the whole thing is just a story that wasn't true, and they just skipped Daniel. And the other thing is maybe he bowed down.
Oh, boy. Right, because yeah, and let's hold on to that, Holly. Let's hold on to that thought for a minute. I'm going to go to Brian, but I want to come back to that.
The only thing that comes, maybe there's no need at this point in the story, kind of like what Barb was saying, no need to, there's a climax, you know, we don't want to get to the climax yet. So there's no need to put Daniel in here, because if we do, then we lose that anxiety to what's going on here with Daniel. I think it's intentional just so that we keep our interest.
Well, aren't those old stories that are first accumulated and put forth in this book.
Right. They're ancient and yet, yeah, ancient and yet modern stories all together. Okay. Yes, Liz.
Could it be because he had that Nebuchadnezzar had already realized Daniel was protected by God, and maybe he was trying to see whether the rest are in the same level of protection? Just a thought.
Well, just a thought, except the next story, actually two stories, a couple of stories hence, we will come to, in chapter 6, we'll come to Daniel in the lion's den, where Daniel has his own, Daniel gets his own story.
Okay,
like
then he
this in
was too
chapter
busy in
6.
the office.
What? Busy at the office. Yeah. Okay. Who else? Did I see another hand? All right. So what I will offer is that all of these stories circulated separately, going sort of to Barbara's thought. All of these stories circulated separately and were told by different groups of people at different times. And that this story was never about Daniel. It was just about the three friends. Because, and I want to come back to Holly's point, that if you notice at the very beginning, they're not just, they're jealous of, go to verse 8. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. And the Jews would have included Daniel. All right, and so the fact we don't see Daniel being thrown in the fiery furnace means one of two things. One, he's just not part of this story because he's going to get his own story. Or two, he bowed down. But what we see from Daniel in the lion's den is that Daniel was not somebody who would bow down. So the assumption that most people take on this is that this is just a story of the three boys. And the three boys are emblematic of the Jews. And by the way, the Jews is a very late term. I am doubtful that the term Jew would have been used in the Babylonian exile. But those who are reading in the time of Antiochus IV Epiphanes certainly would have been called Jews, and they certainly would have associated themselves with the boys. I think almost more so than Daniel. So that's my take, is that this story circulated separately as a story just about the boys. And so therefore Daniel wasn't critical to the telling of the story, and not only wasn't critical, but might have actually taken away something from the story itself of just three ordinary guys. Okay, yeah, Tom.
And in this story, they specifically call out the Chaldeans several times. Now, you know, I think of Chaldeans as Iraqi Christians, so I'm sure that isn't it. Was that a specific area in the Middle East? Was that, they don't talk about anybody else as being from the like Babylonians or anything else like that, or was that a cult, or was that what?
No, Chaldeans is simply another name for Babylonians.
Ah, okay.
And so when you talk about Chaldean Christians from Iraq, essentially Iraq is the area of Babylon. And so therefore they continue that name of Chaldeans.
Ah. Interesting.
So Yeah. And so that's one of those pieces that connects us, that these people are from that same place. Okay, so let's start with the statue. What's your impression of the statue? Mary?
It doesn't say, but I always kind of assume in my mind that it looks like Nebuchadnezzar, that they're going to bow down and worship Nebuchadnezzar because they don't say who it looks like. That's my guess.
Right. And if you've, as we discovered, if you go to Egypt, there are these massive statues of the pharaohs, just massive. And so ancient rulers were not opposed to making massive statues of themselves. Right. This was just something that was relatively common, and evidently it was common throughout Assyria, Babylonia. Okay, so we could, doesn't say, and I think not saying is intentional. But okay, take a moment and look at the dimensions of the statue.
Cubits. They're a bunch of cubits.
Bunch of cubits, but how tall is it?
90 feet.
Right, 90 feet.
90
How
feet.
wide is it?
9. It couldn't stand up, could it?
Right, it's like a pencil.
Like an obelisk.
Right, it's like an obelisk.
Except upside down.
No, it's 6 cubits wide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
60 tall.
Yeah.
So think about an obelisk.
Okay.
Okay, so that would be a very funny looking statue of a person.
True.
Okay.
True.
Now think of how much gold that would have taken to build a 6 foot wide, 90 foot tall obelisk.
Quite a bit of gold, and I'm wondering whatever happened to it.
Yes.
Well, let's assume for a minute that it's probably not real.
Golden statue.
So it would be very hard to see that as a statue of a person, unless you're just this sort of elongated person. But yeah, it's like you do in Photoshop, right? You get
right.
your picture in Photoshop and you just push it down until you look the
right.
way you want to look.
Squeeze that little sucker.
Yeah. So you have this, and in some ways, let me just say, all right, so good storytelling technique, right? This is a story filled with silliness and absurdities.
Yes.
Right? The first silliness and absurdities is a golden statue 90 feet high and 6 feet wide. That's just, it's like, okay, what are you doing? Even the obelisks I don't know, I'd have to think about the obelisks in Egypt, about how tall they are. But that's sort of a silly thing. But beyond being a silly thing, what are people supposed to do with the statue?
Bow down and praise him.
Bow down.
Worship.
Right.
Okay, folks. What does that remind you of?
The golden calf.
Yep.
It's the golden calf.
The
Except it's
golden
not a
calf.
Oh.
Okay, so it combines, it's interesting, it combines a number of pieces. It combines the idea of the golden calf that people are supposed to worship. It combines this idea of self-aggrandizement, that some ruler would create a golden statue with that, that much gold, that tall, that thin, kind of an odd thing. And then who does, the Babylonian Empire is huge, right? It covers massive amounts of territory. But who has to come to the dedication of this statue in verse 2?
Really the whole government.
Yeah, all the big hats.
Yeah, all the leaders, and all
Yeah,
that's everybody.
right. And you think this is what I'm talking about, sort of this sort of silliness. And then he sent for the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come and assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So anybody who's anybody. And who would that include?
Should include Daniel.
Yep. Would include Daniel, the boys.
Hey, John, could this be a loyalty test? I mean, a lot of
Absolutely.
kings are concerned about, the people close to them, and if they're truly loyal, and to bow down to this silly, which I agree now that has no shape, would be, a loyal, I guess, yeah, right, loyalty test.
Right. And so what's, and the very fact that you are to, if you jump down to, just real quickly, down to verse 5, and actually, if you go to verse 4, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, languages," in other words, the whole earth, that when you hear the sound of the pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you have this BC marching band, you are to fall down and worship what?
The golden statue.
Right. You're to worship this golden pencil. That this is a silly thing. It's like, who would ever bring together all the people from all the leaders, and then not just all the leaders are supposed to have a loyalty test, but all the people of all languages, all nations, everybody is supposed to worship the golden pencil. This is sort of parody. In the beginning, it's parody at its best, in a 2nd century BCE kind of way. Because, as one commentator put it, you can see all these people who come and actually do this, sort of being like toadies. Oh yes, we're all going to come and listen to this marching band, and then we're going to fall down and worship the golden pencil. It's just this parody of human nature. And now, that having been, and then 6, whoever does not fall down and worship it shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Great. Okay. So now we'll take a second and back up, go forward. I'm not sure which it would be. All right, so we have this story that's supposedly taking place in the time of the Babylonian exile. We've talked about the fact that it is for the people, finally compiled for the people probably living under Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now, during this period of time, one of the things that Antiochus IV does is he, in the temple in Jerusalem, he sets up an image to himself and he slaughters a pig on the altar to desecrate the temple for the Jews and then to make it a place of worshiping himself and his gods. And what he expects is that all the Jews are going to quit worshiping Yahweh. And in fact, if you are caught with a copy of Torah, you are put to death. If you are caught wearing tefillin or a prayer shawl, you are put to death. Antiochus IV wants to either annihilate the Jewish people or annihilate the Jewish religion. And so for the people in this period of time, while this story is parody, it's also reality. This is their life. You know, there's not the trigon and the harp and all of this, but basically under Antiochus IV, there is, you know, you bow down to him and the Greek gods, or you perish. And so there are these two things running side by side in this story. And by the way, if you read the book of Maccabees, which are not in the Protestant canon, they are in the Catholic. If you have a Catholic Bible, you'll find 1st and 2nd Maccabees. There is the story of a mother with seven sons, and they all perish in a giant frying pan that Antiochus IV had built. And so essentially die in the fire. Because they wouldn't renounce their faith. So now someone comes forward, and so that sets it up. That sets up the context, right? Will they? Won't they? What choice are they going to make? Risk versus reward from yesterday. You know, the risk is you'll be thrown into a fiery furnace. The reward, maybe you'll be doing the will of God. All right, so verse 8. The Jews are denounced.
This picture has a gray flower.
And you notice their chances are that, remember, there are lots of Jews in Babylon. But again, this is a story about the 3 boys. It's not the story of all the Jews who happen to be in exile. It's not about Daniel. The 3 boys become symbolic of all the Jews. All right. And so they go to Nebuchadnezzar, and it's like, you know, we're going to tattle. We're going to tell on these. And it's like they have to remind Nebuchadnezzar, oh, by the way, O king, don't you remember you made a decree? It's like, oh yeah, wow, all right. And the Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, notice again, not Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they pay no heed to you, O king. And this is the critical line in verse 12. Because remember, if you're writing for Jews of the first century or 140 BCE, they do not serve your gods of Rome and Greece, and they do not worship the golden statue that Antiochus IV Epiphanes has set up of himself. Okay, they've made it abundantly clear that they're not, and this expands it, right? Because he didn't say worship your gods. He said, fall down and worship the golden pencil. But here it's expanded. Not only will they not do what you say, but they are essentially traitors because they don't worship your gods. Clear delineation between the Jews and the Chaldeans. All right. How does Nebuchadnezzar respond? Yeah, Mary, Paul and Mary, Mary Marvel.
In rage and fury, and he has them brought before him and questions them. So he's upset.
Right. Yep. He is really ticked off. He's having a bad moment here. Someone has questioned me, which I don't doubt. And by the way, I want to read, this is, as I said to people earlier, this is Nebuchadnezzar II, not the first. This is Nebuchadnezzar II. And this is one of his inscriptions. So if you don't think it would tick him off that someone would not do what he said. He is the king of Babylon, king of Sumer, king of Akkad, and king of the universe. Quite the ego. Okay. So that's Nebuchadnezzar II. So he's ticked off and he questions them, right? As Mary said. And then he gives him a chance, right? This is your final chance. We're going to get the band back together and the band's going to play. And if you don't fall down, boom, into the fiery furnace you go. What happens next is the key, is really the key to the whole story. And I know often we think it's, anyway, the angel in the fiery furnace, but this is the key. So what's the response of the boys? Barbara.
It's like, bring it on. I'm here. I always think that would be putting the Lord, the God, to the test, but they're like, I'm for it. They are so confident. They are so sure.
Well, they do say though that, just in case our God doesn't save us, it still tells us, they still say that that's the God that we're going to worship.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't save us.
Right.
Yeah.
So
they're that confident.
Yeah.
Well,
even if they're not saved, that their God is the God.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Absolutely
not
about that.
It's not the golden.
That's some golden pencil.
Yeah.
Marcy, did you want to say something?
I just was saying that they basically said that we're gonna not worship this statue, whatever, no matter what, if it befalls us. we believe that God will get us, save us from this, but if he doesn't, he's still God, and we're still going to worship him.
Well, yeah, but I thinking about Barbara's, I really want us to look at this, okay? And I'm gonna read it again. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us All right. That is not absolute surety that God can or will save us.
No, but they're confident that their God is God, whether they're saved or they're not. It's just like if you get cancer, it doesn't mean if you have great faith that you're going to live, but you still know that your God is God. You know, that is total confidence. It's not dependent on the test.
Right, right, right. But it's not this confidence that's like, oh yeah, we know we're going to be thrown in the fiery furnace and everything will be fine. That's not
No,
the confidence here.
They do know, but they have confidence that their God is the God of the universe.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Mary Marvel.
Well, my translation says, if there is a God who's able to save us, it is our God. He's not saying he's going to, but if there is a God, it's going to be our God that can save
Right,
us.
which goes back to Barbara's point that they know their God is the God of the universe, who is capable, but probably capable. If there is one, it's probably ours. Brian.
Isn't it almost be blasphemous to be saying that I know my God's going to save me? I mean, there's that element, and it's, some, faith traditions have that in their thing. And I always thought that that's pretty arrogant on our part to make a command upon God that, that he's going to, we're making this, a command. And the other thing I think it was interesting here is that they get a second chance. Usually when you commit treason, you don't have a second chance. You're just taken out. But here we need that second chance so we actually understand what their reasoning was, because we didn't get it at first. We just know they didn't bow down, but we didn't know why. So it all kind of, makes sense.
Yeah, the story needs that explanation.
Right.
Right. I'm going to go to Mary, then Marcy.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar sets it up because he says, do you think there's any God who can save you? And that's why they respond, yes. If there is any God, it'll be ours.
Right.
So Nebuchadnezzar kind of, puts them up, sets them up for that.
Right. In other words, your gods can't do it, Nebuchadnezzar, but chances are ours can. Marcy.
I think I lost my point, so I'm gonna pass.
Oh, Marcy, you're just like me. It's like if I don't write it down, I'm gonna lose it.
Well, yes, you goes in one ear, it's through the brain, out the other ear, or something.
Well, no, somebody else says something, and your brain goes, "Oh, wait, what about that?"
Oh, yeah, that's exactly it. So profound, wonderful things that folks are saying. That's what I would say. Okay.
Right, and so right, and so basically they say, as Barbara said, bring it on. Because even if our God chooses not to save us, we still will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. And going back real quickly to verse 14. Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods and you do not worship the golden statue I have set up? As I say in my notes, this has become, I think I did, personal. This is not just about rules, regulations, laws. This is now personal for Nebuchadnezzar. This is a direct insult to him. And so, they're going to be in trouble. So now, why do you think this response to Nebuchadnezzar matters to the people under Antiochus IV Epiphanes? Why would this be a critical answer? Brian.
Not only then, but I'm just thinking today and in the Gospels, really their decisions betraying their God, a betrayal of Yahweh if they worship the other God. And the betrayal that we saw even from Peter, with Jesus, it's really, I look at it, comes right to us. And kind of back to your sermon again, the risk reward is, what is the risk of betraying your God?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think it's in our everyday life. So I'm kind of looking at more of a generic thing, and going back to that with the Jews would be, yeah, that you're giving up your faith when you do that. And really, what's your life worth when you do that?
Right. Anyone else? Yeah, Mary, and then
Well,
David.
I think it would give them hope that even if they do die, because they won't worship the Greek gods, that God is still with them.
Right.
I mean, look what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They got saved. Now maybe they don't expect to be saved, but they expect that God is with them in the fiery furnace,
Right.
or when they get killed. So
Yeah. Yes. Dave.
Well, I think part of it is the whole time context. There is the immediacy. If you don't save me today, then therefore the God's not in control, versus God's in control and he may intervene in my specific circumstances, but even if he doesn't, he is still in control and his plan will be fulfilled. So I think it's kind of this time continuum that requires you to say, save me, but if you don't, I still will worship you because I know you're in control.
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah, both of you are right on the right track. Liz.
I think it shows a lot of courage of their faith, because without that kind of faith, you'll bow to anything. So if you're true to your faith, it's hard to bend or bow to whatever is put before you.
Absolutely. And Swid, did you have something?
I'm pondering a number of things, but a couple of things that come to mind is that Nebuchadnezzar is in a struggle for power, extreme power. And with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and others of that faith, well, the three particularly, they have they do not respond to, I mean, this is horrific exertion of power by the king. And they have incredible, as Elizabeth said, trust in God. And I think of Nebuchadnezzar as an individual that exerts power with fear and terrible pain. And the God of the three boys is a God of love, who has led the people, who has protected the people, and they put their trust in him. And to me, I see this is a struggle between the two, but I don't know what the word is I want to use at this point, but it's a struggle between Nebuchadnezzar and the faith of these other people.
Right. And that's something that I tried to make clear, that this is not a contest between Nebuchadnezzar and God. This is a contest between Nebuchadnezzar and the boys. Because they're willing to lay it all on the line. They, as you all have said, they are willing to risk their lives for the faith, which is where the Jews of the time of Antiochus IV are. They are being asked to put their lives on the line for being Jewish. And if you watch across the centuries, nothing has changed. Whether it's the pogroms of Russia, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it is anti-Jewish stuff, that the shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue, Jews throughout history have been forced to make this choice, to bow down to the gods or the rulers, or be faithful. And and by the way, a lot of early Christian art in early churches and in underground churches is this story. Because this is a story that gave hope to early Christians who were not willing to give up their faith. The boys became, they became ideals. And Christians said this same thing. Whether our God chooses to save us or not, that's God's business, but we're not going to give in. All right. And so in a sense, and this is, okay. I thinking back to the comments about Nebuchadnezzar being the one who wants all power. This resistance says to him, you do not have all power. Essentially, he loses. Which is why, by the way, I think in China today, China is now actively once again persecuting the church. And the reason I would argue it is the same reason here. That if they're Christians who give their first allegiance to Christ and not to the Communist Party, they are a danger to the Communist Party, which desires to control all people in all ways, in all things, in all aspects of life. And when you give your allegiance to someone else, it means you can't have it, that the party can't have it. And you can say in Russia as well, because the Jehovah's Witnesses are being actively persecuted in Russia, because they say, you have to essentially be Orthodox Christians. And if you're not really Orthodox or Baptist, there are some Baptist groups that have been there since before the revolution, then we're going to persecute you. Brian.
We see this is also almost martyrdom for their faith. I mean, we see Stephen in the New Testament. I mean, when I look at this, I put myself in their shoes and what decision would I make? That's my real test here. And I don't know if I can make the decision they made, to be honest with you. I think we all are going to fall short of that. And I think that's just a reminder to us of how difficult it is to really be faithful in our everyday lives. But would I be wrong in saying that they were martyrs for their faith? I would think that this would be.
Oh yeah, no, a martyr is a witness.
Right.
And they are witnessing to their faith. So they're martyrs. They're martyrs that live. How's that?
Okay, that's true. That's a good point. Okay. Yeah, that's true. So I guess they technically could not be martyrs, but right. Because martyrs don't usually live.
Right.
At least
it's the way we use the term martyr.
Okay, right.
Today. All right. So now we'll get to Mike's question. They get thrown into the fiery furnace, and I have no idea what the fiery furnace looks like. People have tried to figure this out for a long time, and they've come up with all sorts of diagrams and schemes of how you could throw someone in a huge fiery furnace, and yet, the king could look into the fiery furnace. And 7, remember, 7 is
The
Perfect number.
the perfect number. So
Perfect
you
furnace.
wouldn't just heat it up 3 times or 4 times. You'd heat it up 7 times, because that means it's really, really, really hot. It's clean your oven hot, and so 7 times more than was customary. All right. And ordered some of, and again, here's this hyperbole, some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into, there we go. Thank you, John. There is a furnace that could be a fiery furnace. Thank you.
Wow. Nice.
All right. And I assume they could look down from the top in somehow.
Oh,
Is
is it
there?
coming up? It's
Yeah.
the door in the front.
But what happens to the men who throw them in?
They're burned up.
Poof, so hot.
Yep.
The heat is, reminds me of my oven when I open the door to take out something. There is a blast of heat that comes out. And if I have anything metal on me, it really heats up.
Yes. But fortunately, you don't have flames coming out to consume
I
you
hope not.
when you open the oven. But right. And so, in a sense, it's what goes around comes around. That one of the pieces of martyr stories is that those who do the killing are killed themselves. This is part of a good martyr story, right? That this is justice, that these men would throw innocent people into the fiery furnace, then they get consumed. And notice, the men were bound, and this is key, still wearing their what in verse 21?
Their tunics.
All their clothes.
Right. And again, just like pipe, lyre, dragon, you get this listing. Their tunics, their trousers, their hats, their other garments. We get an accounting of what they were wearing. All right. So they get thrown in, fell down, bound in. Okay. Now, and suddenly, evidently, Nebuchadnezzar's watching this whole thing. And so, what does the king see?
4 men walking around, and they're not bound anymore, and they're not hurt. And he sees a 4th figure.
Right. John Crawford. 4. Right. Right. And so there is this mystical moment, right? And how is this 4th individual described?
God.
Right. And the Aramaic here is kind of, it could be like a god, like a son of a god. So someone asked who this person was. Marcy, I think, did. We're not clear. It could be an angel. Christianity has often taken it as Jesus, though that's a bit stretching the point. A messenger of God. But what would be your take on not just who this person is, but the role that they're playing, the 4th person, the role they're functioning in? Right.
Yeah. Why not just, we've seen God's presence here on earth in the Old Testament. He's on Mount Sinai. He's in the burning bush. Why not just the presence of God is with them, protecting them? I mean, that would be as a Jewish person in that time frame, I know that God has come to earth in their stories before. Why not have God in this story?
Well, except this would be problematic for the people in the time, because God, you can't look on the face of God and live. God doesn't take on
a
physical
human
form.
Okay,
right.
I got you. Okay, that's a good point.
Okay. What else? What's the role being played? Yeah, Kathy.
I guess when I read this, I assumed it was an angel as in the role of a protector.
Yeah.
Right. And that's probably the most common understanding here, is that it is because people believe that they had individual angels. You think about the book of Revelation, the say to the angel of the church at Thyatira or Ephesus. So they believe that each person had an individual angel. So yeah, so that's probably the primary understanding, that this heavenly being is acting as a protector of the boys. All right, so, and what's the response then of Nebuchadnezzar?
Praising God.
Pardon, Paul or Mary?
Oh, come on. He says, you guys come out of there. And
Yeah.
then he praises, blesses the power of God again, just like he did with Daniel before.
Right. Yep.
First he asked, didn't we send 3 in there?
Right.
And then they all said, yeah, we did. And then he said, well, there's 4 in there now.
Right. And he also says, they're not hurt. Wow.
Yeah, you're right.
And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they walk out of the fire. And I really love verse 27.
Not a hair on their head was singed.
And what else was not singed?
Clothing.
Their clothing.
Right.
And they didn't even have the smell of fire on them.
Right. It's like they'd been taking a walk on the beach, you know?
There's no evidence at all that they were ever where they were.
Exactly. It's as if it never actually happened. And again, as Marcy said, I think, or someone said in verse 28, and you notice here the word angel, which means messenger, you know, the God Most High who sent his messenger and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And this is always the now, and this is carefully crafted by the writer. It is not God sent God's angel because they trusted in him. It is the God in whom they trusted sent it. There's a difference between there, you know, it's not cause, the cause and effect is not they trusted and so God sent the angel. Okay. It was just God sent the angel, but these were people who trusted.
That's a huge difference.
Yes, it is. And why would that be important? Why would that be important in this story? Or important for the people reading this story?
For us.
For us.
That God is in control.
Right, God's in control. Marcy?
No matter what, if we trust in God, he, no matter what he does to us, it's for our benefit. And we're not responsible for anything that he does. He does. We are just responsible to believe that he cares for us.
Right. We just believe that he cares for us. Yes, Mary.
We don't have to say the magic words. You know, God's going to be there, whether or not we, you know, say the right thing or.
Right. So yeah. So let's think about that. And I'll use the Word of Faith churches that are out there today. And Word of Faith churches means the health and wealth gospel churches. Okay. These are called Word of Faith churches because what they say is that if you believe in your heart that God is going to do something for you, then God must do it. If you give your faith pledge to the pastor, you know, or the evangelist or whatever, and that's your faith pledge, then God must do it. And if God doesn't do it, then it means your faith pledge has not been enough. That you don't have enough faith, that it's all your fault. And I've read lots of stories from people who've gotten caught up in Word of Faith churches, and they've just been desperate, and finally they realized that this is not the way it works. That they had been conned into believing that if they gave more and more and more, that ultimately that more and more would show their faith, and therefore God would do for them. And they finally come to the realization that this is not the spiritual calculus of faith. That, Barbara.
Well, okay, I have no problem that, God doesn't have to answer it, but I do feel that, and I agree with Mary, that I don't have the sense that you have to have the right words, but I do think that prayer can be effective and is important. So it's not like it's irrelevant that God's going to do what God's going to do anyway, which is true too. But I do think of, the lady touching the hem of the garment. I do see God's response to it. It's not that God has to, but that God is gracious enough to do that.
Right. And this is where we struggle. So one of the great things, one of the fundamental beliefs of our Reformed tradition is that God is free. That God is free to do what God desires and chooses to do. That God is not bound by any of our decisions. Okay, and therefore we pray, hoping, trusting, believing that God may act. But we do so with the full knowledge that we don't control God. All the books, if you look for books on prayer, the bookshelves are covered with them saying, here's how to get what you want in prayer. Here's how to be effective in prayer so you get what you want. As if God can sort of be tricked or controlled, rather than it being an interpersonal relationship in terms of prayer. Mary.
Well, that's really saying, all those prayer books are really saying we're in charge, because what we say will make God do this, or if we don't say it, make God not do that. So really it's kind of idolatry, right? I mean, in your own words or whatever, or the magic formula or the magic words, and then you're right, God does. I think about when we read in Exodus, the Hebrews were not praying to God of Yahweh because they had forgotten all about Isaac and Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, but God still intervened. So
right. And as the old country western song said, some of the best things in my life are unanswered prayers.
Right.
So Brian.
Yeah, well, prayer is free, okay? There's no cost to prayer. And I think the example you're showing is, it's almost like bringing your treasures to a sacrificial altar. And I will keep bringing more and more until I get what I want. And so that's a whole different, concept where people could get, involved. So we can all pray. And I agree with Barb, and we all know if our prayers can be answered. We're told in the Bible that God listens, but that's different than saying it's almost like the rites, the Catholic Church in the old days. You gave and gave, and you could.
Well, you had masses said for the dead to get them out of purgatory.
Right. Yeah. And they still. Yeah. Right.
Right. That or you could give money and buy indulgences.
So we put our faith in the wrong place, I guess is the real
Right.
story. Our faith should
Right.
be, right.
And I don't know any priest today who would
No.
who give any credence to indulgences. So that's the medieval church, not the current
Although
church.
when my mother passed away, because I come from a Catholic background, I had a lot of my cousins pay, and gave me, I got a card that my mom would be prayed for. And they
Oh.
there was a cost to do that. So that's still there, not a big deal, but yeah, that was like 20 years ago.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Mary, did I see your hand? No. Okay. Right. And what's interesting is that the fastest growing churches around the world are word of faith churches. And I think in a way that they're growing because they give you the illusion of control. That you can create the outcomes you want in your life. And I think when people feel like their whole life is out of control and they have no control over anything, that's an alluring that's an alluring concept and idea. It's much more difficult to sort of be a pseudo Calvinist and to talk about God being free to do what God wants to do, because then it's all out of your hands somehow. So
Yeah, well, then what do you get from it? The other way, you got something from it.
Well,
right.
Do it right.
Yeah.
Only if you do it right.
That's right. And
you didn't do it right.
But the downside, as I said a minute ago, is when you do everything, and then the preacher says to you, well, you obviously don't have enough faith.
Yeah, you didn't do it right.
Right. You didn't do it right. And you don't have enough faith, that
Yeah.
you just need to keep after it. And one day when you have enough faith, it'll all be okay.
Yeah.
You'll be healed. You'll be 30 pounds thinner, whatever it is that you're looking for. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that blasphemy though?
What?
The way they're getting money off people. Somebody sells everything to give the money to the church, to the minister. So would you consider that blasphemy?
I can't speak for what's in the heart of these guys who do this. All I can say is that most of their money comes from people who are poor, and they live in multi-million-dollar homes. They have their own jet planes. They have yachts, and they tell people, and I've heard this personally, so I can say this, if you don't have any money, you just put your pledge on your credit card, because God will pay off your credit card for you. So I'll let you all be the judge of what you think about these guys. Anyway, I'll just I'll let you all think about that.
Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? I mean, Janis Joplin had it.
Yep. My favorite was the guy who needed a second jet plane because his first jet plane wouldn't fly him to Europe or Africa without having to stop, and he didn't want to fly in a tube filled with demons, meaning commercial airliners. And let me be honest, there's sometimes I've flown Southwest and I think I'm in a tube filled with demons, but that's a whole nother story.
Having 20 hours on a plane yesterday.
Between two flights, yeah.
15
and 5, we agree.
So in the end, so you get verse 29, a new decree. You know, a new decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb. And if I'm in the first century under Antiochus, this is what I want to hear. That ultimately there is justice done for those who want to destroy us, including Antiochus IV, who has blasphemed against the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then what happens to the three boys?
They're promoted.
Promoted.
Yeah, they get a promotion.
And a pay raise, I hope.
I would guess so.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, they're faithful. God is faithful to them. So this is Hesed, God's covenant faithfulness. You know, it's not, God's faithfulness is not dependent on their faithfulness. As someone said earlier, I think maybe Brian, that God was always being faithful even when the people weren't. But God is faithful to them to bring them through this, even though there are lots of times when people didn't get brought through this. So, any last thoughts? Yes, Mary.
And this is actually about the last lesson. I looked this up. You've heard the expression someone having feet of clay. Well, that's related to that story about the statue with the gold, silver, bronze, iron. And so I thought, I wonder if that is from that, and it is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, which would be a silly statue to make the feet of clay, because clay easily is broken and the whole statue would collapse. So, anything else in this? All right. Who'd like to close us in prayer this morning? Oh, Marcy, but Marcy's gone.
Uh-oh.
Who'd like to do that? Who'd like to close us?
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Brian.
As we studied the book of Daniel this morning, may we be inspired by the courage of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whose faith was put first. May we show this same courage in our daily lives in serving you by serving all people in need, bringing your kingdom closer to us. Amen.